The way that Riot handles League of Legends and their approach to development is not perfect. We all know that. But one thing that I think we often take for granted is how they take community feedback, because historically some of the biggest game developers that make these AAA titles aren't nearly as transparent about discussing what their player base wants. For example, Blizzard has been infamous over the last 10 to 15 years for killing games because they don't seem to have a care in the world what the player base thinks. It's a bit unrealistic to expect League of Legends to be like old school RuneScape. Old school RuneScape takes a direct player feedback approach by having a polling system in the game in order to release content. Players can vote on what they want to see and what they don't want to see. Jagex is able to do this for old school RuneScape because they only need to keep about 100,000 players happy, not 100 million. As good as Riot is for a AAA developer, there's also no excuse for neglecting champions and refusing to listen just because they are unpopular. Riot can be pretty unfair with the niche smaller communities, because if Yasuo or Thresh ever had any problems or horrible bugs that made them unplayable, they would do their best to fix it as soon as possible. For quite a while now, it's felt like if you main a champion such as Ivern, Skarner, or Trundle, you have been left on the back burner and you're so far down the priority list, you may as well expect nothing. But recently, there has been a champion that has been so screwed over, I think we need to talk about it today. Let's cover what happened to Aurelion Sol. Just before we start, I wanted to thank today's sponsor, Buff. Buff is an authorized Overwolf application that rewards you for playing your favorite video games. Seriously, it's really cool. Whether you're using it while you play League of Legends or Valorant or many of your other favorite games, you'll earn Buff coins which can be used to redeem skins, gift cards, game keys, and even hardware. It's really simple to use. All you have to do is have the Buff application run in the background while you play, and the app itself will not affect your gameplay in any way. You won't notice FPS drops or any hiccups, so if you've really wanted to earn a skin for your favorite champion lately, why not go download Buff using my link in the description down below and earn some Buff coins. Aurelion Sol was released on March 24th of 2016, but his story goes back way further than that. Exil was released as a redesign for one of League of Legends' cancelled champions. Riot cancelling champions seemingly doesn't happen anymore, either because they're just not telling us, or maybe they simply don't cancel any more champions. Either way, some of League's most famous cancelled champions include Averdrian, Omen, and of course, Shin. Shin has garnered a legendary status in League history. Way back on September 9th, 2013, a post made to the forums was a sneak peek to a champion who was in early development. The Storm Dragon champion named Shin immediately caught the eye of the community. Even though it was just in the early stages, players were already begging for him to come out. But their wish would not be granted, as 1 year would pass and Riot was silent. Then 2 years would pass and still nothing. Finally, towards the early parts of 2016, nearly 2.5 years later, they would make another post to update the progress on Shin's release. After apologizing for keeping us in the dark, they also said the champion that we were all expecting was not going to make it to the live servers. Shin had changed a lot in his development, and the theme of the Storm Dragon was gone. Instead, they solidified a space theme. Shin's legacy has lived on past the cancelled champion phase. He has made an appearance in TFT, and the Storm Dragon Aurelion Sol skin is an homage to him. While we never got to see him properly, what we did get to see is the release of Aurelion Sol, which is where the story begins.
It's like you play this guy and you feel like that you're not doing anything, but then you see the damage that you do and you're like, wow, I still feel like I'm not doing anything. But it's just weird and awkward trying to deal DPS with him. Now, there are just a few things that I would wish would happen to make him just like feel better, like letting him double press his Q so he doesn't have to get dicked on by like melee champions out the ass, or making it so then his W moves faster as you level it up. But still, he feels awkward.
Aurelion Sol's got the most clunkiest kit in history of mankind.
Right away, players knew two things about Aurelion Sol. The first is that he was actually a good champion who did a lot of damage and had great utility. But at the same time, they also knew that, oh my goodness, was he so frustrating to learn and play. He was so freaking clunky. So much of the reason that I think this champion has never been popular for coming on 5 years is that he just feels like garbage to learn. I find him frustrating and irritating and headache-inducing trying to play him, and micromanaging the stars, using the Q and the R is a little clunky as well, and if you don't have tons and tons of games on the champion, it's easy to just get right out of practice if you haven't played him in a while.
And it seems that both the enemy Aurelion Sol and I both really suck at CSing so far. And these stars are actually a lot more difficult to hit than I was giving them credit for.
I'm not gonna lie, if this thing kind of flying around me the whole time is a little distracting at first. It feels a little distracting. The one thing I'm noticing about the Q is that it has a little bit of a delay. It's got a tiny bit of a delay before you can actually... Wow, that is a ridiculously long cooldown on the E.
But even still, he was probably the most rewarding champion of all time to learn, because after a solid 100 to 200 games of practice, eventually you could start utilizing all of his strengths as a champion, which there were a ton of. The roaming, laning, late game scaling, his DPS, his burst, he did it all. His learning curve and reward for practicing him lined up pretty well with champions like Nidalee and Exil, but they are more enticing to learn because they don't seem as awkward to try. Even if Nidalee is hard to play, most players don't completely run it down on their first few games playing Nidalee. If you hit a couple of spears and use your E to at least heal your allies, you can be useful. But with Aurelion Sol, you better be ready to int for like 25 games. Within just 2 weeks of his release, he already received some nerfs, and then he was nerfed again, and nerfed again. Nobody doubted that he was strong once they learned him. His release year for Season 6 was by far the strongest version of the champion we had ever seen for both pro and solo queue. Pro players like Huhi and Fly would make a name for themselves with their Aurelion Sol gameplay during that season. As for Huhi, his most famous play would come on the biggest stage.
B for Rock, still waiting for 1-2 pick here. Could be the Aurelion Sol locked in. It is Gnar for Darshan, and Huhi gets Aurelion Sol.
The Peanut actually goes right by it, but Huhi level
right
1
down.
roam!
Prey gets hit. Yes, it is the roam.
That Fog of War toggle on the top side.
Whoa.
Neither of them wants to really give up ground because of the playmaking ability of Teleport.
Gets the passive out of Kuro. There's gonna be enough. And the voice of light drops Kuro. Huhi picks it up.
Control on the inside track. Aframu.
Rox has always been able to answer CLG's kill. Now CLG again wants the answer back. Rinse and repeat as they go to the top side. And a double kill for Huhi.
Well, here's your test, Papa. Very thanky.
Level 15, 902. Absolutely blows up Prey.
Holy crap.
Leaves the rest of the team to do so as they try to get away now. Smeb, Keeper's Verdict, has no say in this fight, and he's going to be the next focus. A Gnar out from Darshan causes the rest of Rocks to turn away.
This game from Huhi was absolutely masterful. He was ridiculous on this champion. Against the Rocks Tigers no less, one of the tournament favorites out of Korea, he dropped an 11 kill, 1 death, and 6 assist game. During the Season 6 World Championship, Exil was a top tier pick. Guys like Maple, Crown, Scout, Kuro, Fly, Huhi, Xiaohu, all of them had amazing performances with the champion. The competitive mid lane meta would also play a role in why he was so strong. These short range mages like Cassiopeia, Ryze, and Malzahar have always been decent matchups for him, as he can space a lot better from them compared to long range champions, and they aren't the melee assassins that can easily murder him. But following that season, it's been mostly downhill for this dragon. With how strong that Aurelion Sol was after his release, a few problems with his kit started becoming noticeable. It was great that he provided a rewarding learning curve, but just because a champion is hard to play doesn't always mean it's okay to be overpowered. There was a post from Dopa that gained some traction back then. In the post, he was pretty aggressive with his stance on the champion, so take any biases he has into account when reading this, because clearly he had a strong opinion, but he also did a great job of outlining what his problems were. Dopa said, Aurelion Sol was the most broken champion in the game. After the nerf, he is still strong but manageable. Any player that raised their elo significantly with Sol are boosted trash. The reason being is that when a good player and a bad player meet in lane, you can clearly see the bad player lose XP or CS and lose level over time, resulting in snowballing. But with Sol, a bronze player can play the lane out easily against a challenger player. The thing with Sol comes from the fact that when the enemy challenger player knows this, he tries to kill the boosted Sol early on and duel him, but you lose. If you look at Sol challengers, they are all Sol one-trick ponies. They would be rotting in plat and low diamond in previous seasons, but then got up because of the champion. If you want some proof, go look at Sol one-trick pony challengers. They are all above 60% win rate. If you are 60% win rate in challenger, you need to be way higher. The point that Dopa was trying to make is that Sol kinda became the ultimate elo inflating champion, which is to say that if the Sol one trick were to play a different champion in the same elo, they would be significantly worse than the other people in that game. But the reason that Aurelion Sol players and Aurelion Sol mains could get away with climbing higher on the ladder than they probably should have was because Aurelion Sol was incredibly hard to punish. When Dopa was talking about the laning phase, he said that Sol was unbeatable in the 1v1 shove and lane priority, so he could just constantly roam and cheat the lane. The Aurelion Sol player was not forced to learn the mechanics of the laning phase at a challenger level. He didn't have to beat and lane against challenger players the same way you would on any other champion, learning the trading patterns, the matchup, the CSing, all that stuff, because all you had to do was turn on your W and shove every wave and then move around the map. Somebody who was a mid laner stuck in platinum on every other champion in the game, if they picked up Sol and had the mechanics and knew what they were doing most of the time, they could easily boost their elo higher than they had ever been, as high as Master or Challenger. A reasonable question that you might have now is if Dopa really thought he was that broken, and if the champion was actually that strong, how come he wasn't reworked immediately or permabanned every game in Challenger elo? Well, the thing is, even though there were the Aurelion Sol mains, just as always, he has been unpopular. His popularity chart speaks for itself. If you look at his play rate over the last 5 years since he's been out, it doesn't look too bad, right? The actual graph is fine. But then you look at the scale on the left and you realize, wow, that is a small scale. For comparison, Thresh's popularity chart goes all the way up to 60%, while Sol's is stuck down at 6%. It's crazy to think that over the last couple of years, he hasn't even surpassed the 3% pick rate threshold. These problems would eventually leave him in limbo for about a year and a half. Riot knew that they could not buff this champion, and they could not bring him back to that 2016 power level, so it would force them to finally rework him in 2019. Patch 9.17 is a day that lives in infamy among the Aurelion Sol mains. To many, it's when the champion died. Let's go through this rework one ability at a time and break down what happened. First up, his passive. It did receive a buff actually, which meant that crowd control abilities would no longer turn off your stars, but that change would be overshadowed by the fact that his level 1 and early game was nerfed pretty hard. This made his early game dueling and his level 1 roams pretty much impossible. Next, his Q Star Surge actually received a couple of nice buffs considering all of the other things that he needed to be compensated for. Having a 7-second cooldown in the late game and the mid game if you max at second means you can get off a lot more CC, the movement speed increase is pretty nice as well, and a quality of life buff meaning that if he's faster than the star will speed up to keep up with him. But what comes next is the doozy. These W changes are a huge pain point for current Aurelion Sol players. Some of them don't mind the new W at all and find the movement speed that it gives at the end of the duration to be quite nice. However, plenty of others have said this is the reason they quit the champion, and in some extreme cases is the reason that they quit League of Legends altogether. The fact that this ability only lasts for 3 seconds now is such a hard thing to get over for many Aurelion Sol players. The thing that was hardwired into their brain after years and years of practice, trying to land as many stars as possible at the speed at which they flew around the champion, is now gone. He's always had such a weird playstyle mechanically that forces you to move forward and backward, constantly kiting and then pressuring, orb walking if you will, not just paying attention to enemy abilities, but also your own stars. And when that consistency is lost by only making it 3 seconds and then speeding up how fast the stars go, it can be really punishing and almost hard to get over. The changes that his E Comet of Legend got were also pretty big. He lost his passive movement speed when moving in a direction, making his roams and walking back to lane generally a lot slower, but the compensation is that the E is now more of a global ability. It sounds good on paper to have a Twisted Fate ultimate on Aurelion Sol, except for the fact that he has a lot more counterplay than all the other globals in the game. The enemy is able to see your landing location far before you get there, and you can see him flying over the terrain, which means that you typically don't get to use the full range regardless because it would be too telegraphed. Some Aurelion Sol players have started to max their E second now, and when testing him a bit myself for this video, I have to agree this feels pretty nice. Maxing E second will increase the speed in which you fly, and around level 13 when you get it maxed out, it's almost like you get a Twisted Fate ultimate on a 40 to 60 second cooldown depending on how much CDR you have. The part that really sucks about his 2019 rework a year and a half later is that nothing got bettered for this champion after the patch. Think about it like this. Is Aurelion Sol more popular? Nope. His pick rate is exactly the same as it's always been. Is he more competitively viable? Well, no, he is in fact worse. He's less viable. He still hasn't been picked by any major regions this year. Did it nerf some of his problems in his kit that they intended to solve? Yeah, I suppose that it did, but at the massive cost of dividing the community and making him less enjoyable to play. Something like 60 to 70% of the posts on the Aurelion Sol main subreddit since the day that the rework came out are just asking for a revert. It's very clear what their opinion is of this champion right now, and yet nothing has been done. So the question now is why? Riot's history on reverting and fixing their mistakes is honestly not too bad. A couple of examples where the players were asking for a revert were for Rengar, Ahri, and LeBlanc. But the hypocritical part of this situation is that with Aurelion Sol, his rework has put him into the worst situation of all four of these champions, yet each of the other three got reverted. LeBlanc and Rengar saw their kits be updated in the massive Assassin class rework, and they didn't just become good champions, they became the two best champions in the game. The rework for LeBlanc turned her into a split-pushing mage-assassin hybrid with the Gunblade build. She was given excellent wave clear and safety while pushing side lanes, which rocketed her to the #1 priority pick for all of Season 7 Pro Play. In 2017 alone, she was banned 1,700 times with 300 total picks, a presence of 65% in competitive. After just about a year, she would end up being reverted for two main reasons. The first is that she was clearly overloaded and the rework didn't necessarily fix any of her problems, it just gave her some new ones. And the second is that a decent amount of LeBlanc players didn't like the rework because they had to wait for the passive timer. That 1.5 second delay bothered quite a few LeBlanc mains and they preferred the old version, so she was given a full revert. In the case of Rengar, it was even more extreme. The Season 7 Rengar rework took this assassin that was completely reliant on pub stomping games to being the best jungler in competitive play. He was finally viable outside of solo queue. Rengar's rework gave him the Swim Q, a skill shot version of his Q that had AoE to help him clear the jungle, but it could actually miss. It was a little clunky and took a while to get used to because for all the Rengar mains that mastered his triple Q combo, it was kind of awkward. Even with that being the case, the difference between his 2016 numbers and his 2017 numbers for Pro is absolutely absurd. In 2016, Rengar was banned only twice and picked 11 times in Pro Play, but after the rework for 2017, he saw 859 bans and 461 picks. The Swim Q gave him a much healthier and faster jungle clear. He no longer was reliant on Tiamat, and he could build tankier bruiser items with a setup around Black Cleaver and sometimes even Cinderhulk. He was finally a god tier champion at the highest levels of play, and yet they still reverted him. The crazy part about that as well is that they didn't even fully revert Rengar. They let him keep the cleanse on his empowered W, which is something he was given with the original rework. They basically just reverted his Q back to the old one and a couple of changes to his R, but all of last season, in Season 10, he only saw 10 total picks. These two champion reworks for Rengar and LeBlanc were, by the numbers, very, very successful. They made them more viable for both solo queue and competitive play, and they made the champions better. Riot could have easily said that they won't revert them because they're now viable in pro play, but with enough players saying that they wanted the old version, they got what they asked for. Considering the failures of the Aurelion Sol rework, and since the community isn't all that big, why won't Riot just take a direct and clear approach to fixing the champion? The subreddit is a literal ocean of ideas and mains saying what they want to see. They could also reach out to several high-elo Aurelion Sol mains and have them tested on the PvE and give them feedback, and they don't even need to release it right away. They could do at least a few rounds of testing. If that sounds like something Riot would never do and that sounds too good to be true, well, they already have. Just take a look at the Wukong rework. Wukong was another champion that received a mini rework. It was a sort of minor update to bring him to modern standards. It was on the PvE for several months, and it had multiple different iterations. He was released to the PvE for testing, and then put back into Riot's hands internally for more changes, and then back out onto the PvE over and over again. This process helped them slowly but surely fine-tune exactly what they wanted the rework to be. They took their time on it, and honestly, I think in the end it was worth it. This rework and this update for Wukong pretty much has no reason for old Wukong mains to hate it. It's just better, stronger, and probably healthier in every single way. Each one of his abilities received minor changes to ensure that he can stay relevant, and sure enough, he's been a good and strong champion ever since the update, but his playstyle, aside from build optimization or being more bruiser rather than assassin focused, is almost exactly the same. The champion really isn't all that different. An approach like this for Aurelion Sol makes the most sense. He has such a unique feel and playstyle that getting his W and passive just right will make the players feel better about other changes in the kit. Why not give the community periodic updates on how the progress is going and making these changes more fairly? Where I really align with the Aurelion Sol community is I don't think they're asking for special treatment, just the treatment that other champions have already gotten in the past. Thankfully, all hope is not lost. As of just about 2 weeks ago, Riot King Cobra, a high-elo solo queue player and QA analyst over at Riot, would post to the Aurelion Sol main subreddit asking what the players wanted to see. He states very clearly in his post that it doesn't guarantee any changes or make any promises, but transparency from Riot is always good. Here's what his post had to say. I want to better understand where Aurelion Sol players want his power to be distributed on his kit. I have my own thoughts on the topic and have had conversations with some of you on Discord about it as well, but I wanted to expand the reach of those conversations to everyone on this subreddit too. To that end, I'd like to ask a couple of questions. Aurelion Sol, in my opinion, has two primary gameplay identities. He's a roaming mage that excels at pressuring side lanes and generating a lead through macro pressure, and he's also a battle mage that deals consistent AoE damage in teamfights. Which of these identities do you feel should be Aurelion Sol's primary gameplay identity? How would you feel if we redistributed power from Exil's E, his roaming tool, into sustained DPS, i.e. nerfing his E in some way to buff damage? To be 100% transparent and set expectations, this post does not guarantee that we will make balance changes to Aurelion Sol. It is explicitly intended to give me a better understanding of what Aurelion Sol players want out of the champion if we were to make simple shifts in how the power is distributed in the kit. This post from King Cobra is some light at the end of the tunnel for Aurelion Sol mains, and I hope they get the treatment they deserve. All of this to me leaves a very worrying trend about League of Legends as a whole. Just because it hasn't happened to a champion that I like to play or a champion that you like to play doesn't mean that it won't in the future. You shouldn't want Aurelion Sol change because you care so much about the people that play such an unpopular champion. You should probably care because if your main champion was put in the same situation, you'd feel really bad about it too. I think something Riot has lost over the last few years with it being such a mainstream game and pro play being so important is that we seem to forget it's just a video game at the end of the day. The game should still be fun, balanced or not. Removing and reworking toxic mechanics is understandable, but I think what happened here is way too far. Let me know what you thought of this video and what you think of Aurelion Sol right now, and if you enjoyed, it would mean a lot to me if you hit like and left a comment. It always helps out with the YouTube algorithm, and it's a lot more important than you might think. Thank you so much, and also thank you one more time to Buff for sponsoring today's video. Please check out my link in the description down below and go download Buff. It's really awesome to earn. You could even earn the Storm Dragon Aurelion Sol skin for yourself. It would be really cool if you could check it out. Thanks so much, and I'll see you guys next time.